concept assembly line, where ideas get to work.
With the big beautiful bill now working its way from the House to the Senate, the living within our means chorus is in full effect. We are told over and over again that the government must borrow before it can spend, that it issues Treasury bonds to raise money, and that someday, if we don't stop the borrowing, the bond markets will lose confidence and force austerity upon us. But like so much in economic folklore, this tale persists more by repetition than by reality. To understand what Treasury bonds actually are, and just as importantly, what they are not, we have to make a crucial distinction: the difference between the primary and secondary bond markets. It's in this distinction that the myth of fiscal constraint begins to unravel. When the U.S. government issues new bonds, it does so in the primary market. These are auctions conducted by the Treasury Department, where authorized dealers, mostly large financial institutions, buy newly issued securities like Treasury bills, notes, and bonds. These transactions serve a specific technical function. They drain bank reserves from the system in order to help the Federal Reserve maintain its target interest rate. They are not how the government obtains money to spend. That's because the federal government, as the issuer of the US dollar, always spends first. When Congress authorizes a payment, say for a highway project or Social Security check, the Treasury credits the recipient's bank account by instructing the Fed to mark up the balance. Only after this spending occurs does the Treasury issue bonds, not to fund the spending, but to offset the reserve effects of the new dollars entering the system. This sequencing is not accidental. It's the architecture of sovereign currency systems. As detailed in previous work, like The Shadow We Fear, this flips the standard household analogy on its head. The U.S. government is not a family tightening its belt or a business seeking capital. It is a currency issuer, not a currency user. The taxes it collects and the bonds it issues are not revenue in the traditional sense. They are tools for managing inflation, interest rates, and the monetary base. The claim that we must spend within our means is not just misleading, it is a category error. Once Treasury securities are issued, they begin to trade in the secondary market, a sprawling, liquid ecosystem where investors buy and sell existing bonds. Here, prices fluctuate based on demand, inflation expectations, global capital flows, and central bank policy. This is where most of the action happens, and it's where we find the roots of the second great confusion, the myth that bond markets discipline governments. What actually happens is far more mundane and far more speculative. Because Treasury securities pay a fixed coupon, interest over time, the yield an investor earns depends on the price they pay. If a bond with a $1,000 face value pays $30 annually, its yield is 3%. But if investors grow nervous about inflation or lose confidence in the Fed's control of rates and start dumping bonds, prices fall. Buy that same bond for $900 and the yield jumps to 3.33%. Buy it for $800 and now it yields 3.75%. This is not market punishment in the moralistic sense. It's basic asset pricing. These price shifts are speculative, driven by traders looking to profit off future movements in interest rates and bond values. Yes, there is a link between investor sentiment and Treasury yields, but that link is mediated through psychology and arbitrage, not fiscal solvency. The government's payments to bondholders are operationally guaranteed by the same entity that marked up the bank accounts in the first place, the Federal Reserve. That doesn't mean the bond market is irrelevant. Far from it. While the government can never run out of money in its own currency, the price of its debt in the secondary market influences financial conditions across the economy. Most notably, the yield on the 10-year or 30-year Treasury serves as a benchmark for everything from corporate loans to student debt to the crown jewel of American household finance, the 30-year fixed-rate mortgage. When long-term Treasury yields spike, mortgage rates often follow. That's because mortgage-backed securities, MBS, compete with Treasuries for investors. If Treasuries start offering 5% returns with zero credit risk, MBS must offer even higher returns to attract capital, forcing mortgage rates upward. The result? Higher borrowing costs for consumers, fewer home purchases, and potentially a slowdown in housing construction and household formation. So yes, bond markets can create real macro risks, not because they threaten the government's solvency, but because they influence the cost of private credit. This is an important distinction. A spike in yields may delay someone's home purchase or raise corporate debt service costs, but it won't cancel your Social Security check or delay a highway resurfacing project. The Federal Reserve has tools to counteract destabilizing spikes in long-term rates. One is quantitative easing, QE, a policy whereby the Fed buys long-term securities to push their prices up and yields down. This is not fiscal policy, it's a monetary operation. QE can be used tactically to suppress rates if macroeconomic stability is threatened, as it was during the 2008 crisis and again in 2020. Critics often portray QE as a form of backdoor deficit financing, but that misreads the sequence. The Fed is not printing money to fund spending. It is swapping one form of government liability, bonds, for another, bank reserves, all within the plumbing of the financial system. The goal is to steer financial conditions, not bankroll Congress. Longer term, if market volatility in the secondary Treasury market becomes a persistent drag on the economy, we have other options. One is direct public lending, such as government-backed mortgage facilities that decouple consumer rates from bond yields. Another is expanding postal banking or public investment banks that lend on policy-driven rather than market-driven terms. These institutions already exist in many advanced economies and could buffer the household sector from unnecessary rate shocks. The bond market matters, but not in the way we've been told. It doesn't hold the keys to the Treasury. It doesn't finance government spending, and it doesn't determine whether America can afford its ambitions. What it does do, critically, is shape the terrain of private finance. And that makes it important to understand clearly, without mythology. The sooner we abandon the myth that Uncle Sam borrows from a bond market that might someday cut him off, the sooner we can focus on what really matters, whether we are using our public resources to build a more stable, equitable, and prosperous economy. There are real questions of the wisdom of the budget as proposed. Cuts to energy tax credits are asinine and self-defeating. Draconian cuts to healthcare for the masses are both unnecessary and counterproductive. Tying these real concerns up with false concerns of bond vigilantes obscures the real debate that needs to happen. Tax cuts or taxes collected do not influence these spending issues either way. We need to stop tying the two together. This video is part of a broader project to reimagine public policy for real people, grounded in modern monetary theory, committed to abundance over austerity, and focused on rebuilding the freedom infrastructure of everyday life. If my work resonates with you, share it. Subscribe on YouTube for more multi-format content. Together, we can reclaim what was once built and build it back better.